Hello, friends. So, today we're talking about our stories of addiction. Um, we just sat and heard Cindy's story, so I'm gonna wait for a few people to pop in on here and then we'll get started. This part makes me a little bit nervous because not a lot of people know the depths of my addiction. Hey, Cindy. Loving this background, eh? Okay, so I am just gonna get started. So, the topic of the day is addiction. So, I would say um, I was maybe 11 or 12 when I had my first drink. Um, my parents were out of town, and my sister was hosting a party with all of her friends. And at that time, I was um, the designated beer watcher. And so, one of my sister's friends gave me my very first Bud Light, and I absolutely loved it. Um, I felt, I guess I felt out of myself, if that makes sense. I was carefree, and I guess I just felt like one of the people at the party, even though I was only 12 or 13. Um, from there, when I was about 13, my parents got divorced. And so, um, along with that came a whirlwind of emotion. Um, I chose to stay with my father in Howard. Um, and from that point on, I guess I watched my dad struggle with alcoholism. Um, and at that time, a family member would, let me back up. Um, Me and my friend actually, so going to school, I was never really one of the popular kids. Um, I was bullied a lot all through elementary school, all through high school, until I became the cool kid because I knew where to get alcohol. And I had a family member buying alcohol for all these people in my class that beforehand would pay me no mind, would bully me all the time. And so from that point, I felt super cool because I knew where to get the booze. And my voice is shaky. I'm a little nervous. I knew where to get the booze. And so I never really was a big drinker. Through my high school days, I drank. Um, I partied a lot because I really didn't have um, any guidance, I would say. I was allowed to stay out all hours of the night. The boyfriend I had at the time moved in with me when I was just 16 um, because he got kicked out of his house. And so my dad wanted him to graduate high school. And so he took him in. And from there, life just kind of got a little bit chaotic. Um, I found myself running from my house all the time. I wasn't going to school, I was skipping school. When I was 14, a friend of mine and I got this bright idea that we were going to drink in school. Kind of like what Cindy said. We were going to drink in school, so we poured beer into clear plastic water bottles and brought them to school and tried to pass them off as iced tea. Well, one of the popular girls overheard me and this friend of mine talking, and she ratted us out to the principal. And so I ended up having to call my dad because I got expelled from school for about 3 days, I think it was. Um, and in that time frame, um, I guess I just, drinking made me feel cool. I was a cool kid, and So I was going out and I was partying all the time. I was carefree. I didn't seem to have a worry in the world except for when I went home at night. Um, and from there, um, I guess the first time I ever smoked pot, I was, 15, I would say. And I absolutely loved it. Um, it took away my anxiety. It made me feel like I fit in with everybody. Um, I guess that went on for about a year or two, and then I started to dabble into other things. A person that lived in Howard, um, that was well known around there for being a meth addict, gave me my first, excuse me, gave me my first, what do you want to call it? Crank, I guess. Um, I didn't really know what I was supposed to feel at the time when I did it. I just knew that I didn't really care for it much because it didn't do anything for me at that time. And so the boyfriend that I had at the time found out that I did it and got super mad at me. Um, and I remember it to this day. He told me I crossed a road or I crossed a bridge I'd never come back from. And at that time, I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about because I just tried it once. It would be fine. Nothing bad's going to come of it. Little did I know that a few years later, so after smoking pot and going out and partying all the time, when I was 20, 21, I was drinking super heavy with my first son's dad. At that time, um, I was 5 months pregnant and I didn't even know that I was 5 months pregnant. I was using meth, and at that point, I finally reached the high that everybody was talking about. The happy, the go lucky, not a care in the world type of high. And I found myself chasing that high for, you could say, the next 8 years. So I was 22. I was 5 months pregnant with Mason. I cleaned up my act and I went home to live with my sister at the time. I didn't use drugs. I was sober. Luckily, when I had Mason, he came out and he didn't test positive for anything. So that was a relief. I was a single mom at that time, and I found myself starting to go out more on the weekends, drinking, going to the bars with my sister's mutual friend that we had at the time. And it wasn't until then, I think Mason was about 3 months old, that my mom came to me and she sat me down and she asked me if I would be willing to give temporary guardianship to my sister so that I could get the partying out of my system. And at that time, I was like, oh, yeah, that's a great idea because then it will give me a chance to grow up. But I never did. And the partying never stopped. I found myself putting myself in situations that I should have never been in. They gave me, my sister and my mom, they gave me all the opportunity in the world to come back and to be a mom to Mason and to get my life together. But I just couldn't get it together. And so when Mason was 4 months old, I signed guardianship over to my sister and I left. I moved to Salem with my great friend Jamie at the time. And that is where my life took a turn for the worst. I got together with, we'll just call him Bob at the time. We were together. We had a nice little apartment in Salem. We were partying all the time. It got to the point where we lied to his parents and told his mom that I was a diabetic. And that's why I needed insulin needles. Because I would say I was like 23. Nope. 22 when I first um, shot up opiates. And I believe it was Oxycontin. We got them from a mutual friend of ours. Um, and so we were lying and we were stealing all the time. And then Bob got busted and he went to jail. And at that time, I really didn't know what to do with myself, I guess, because I was dependent on him. I've always kind of been dependent on needing a man in my life for some reason to take care of me. And I think it has to do with dating back to when I was 16 and my dad let my first boyfriend move in with me because he always made me feel safe. He always protected me, I guess, if you want to say that. So he went to jail, and then things really got bad. I met a drug dealer, and we'll call him Jimmy. How about we'll just say call him Jimmy. So I met a drug dealer. We got together and started dating. We left the town of Salem and moved to Sioux Falls. And that's really where my drug addiction kicked into full force. This guy had everything all the time. It was like every month we were doing something different, from ecstasy to LSD to methamphetamines to cocaine. It was just a whirlwind of craziness, I guess you could say. We partied all the time, and I was always afraid in the back of my mind that the SWATs were going to come and kick in our door, that we were going to be arrested. Not saying I never did get arrested, because I did. I got arrested multiple times for possession of marijuana. I remember one day we were living over on 12th Street, and he was out and about doing his rounds, and I was high off of, I don't even know, opiates, I think. And he came upstairs and told me that a family member was down taking the starter off my car. And so me, not even thinking at the time, called the cops because I needed my car. We needed to get around. And not me being high like I didn't even think that the cops would think anything of it. Well, this family member happened to tell the cops exactly what job profession that my boyfriend was in at the time. And I ended up getting arrested for having a warrant, and so I stayed in jail for 10 days, which I can't even deny that those 10 days in jail probably, I kind of felt relieved, because for those days, I wasn't around dope, and I wasn't around partying, I wasn't around craziness and chaos. But when I got out of jail, we got evicted from that apartment and we moved into a different one over on the east side of town. And that's really where everything kind of spun out of control, I guess you could say. I met this guy at Quiznos, the sandwich shop that I worked at. And he was also, you could call him a kingpin, I guess, if you really wanted to. He was a big drug dealer. And so I found myself, I met my really good friend through this guy, mind you. She always kind of looked out for me. She always kind of had my back. She made sure that I wasn't going to kill myself with overdosing, basically. But don't get me wrong, she partied with me too. And so we started selling drugs together. Me and Jimmy, sorry. We started selling drugs together. And at that time, I had no idea. I was oblivious to what selling drugs was. And we would stock up on ecstasy and cocaine, and we would drive ourselves down to Madison, and we'd sell it off to friends we had down there. Most of the time we ended up staying and partying our faces off until dawn. Um, Often driving home still high as a kite, which was stupid. um, Eventually, things started to get worse, and me and Jimmy started fighting a lot more, um, because the meth was taking over his life, basically. All he wanted to do was do meth and get high. And so in 2008, um, after being awake for about 2 weeks straight, the paranoia kicked in, and we heard that the cops were coming down on us. And so we jumped in the car and we left to California with $125 in our pocket, 6 ecstasy pills, and some weed. And our grand plan, hey Jill, our grand plan was that we were going to sell the drugs on the way to California, so because we needed money for gas and stuff. When we got out to California, we went to stay at his dad's house, which, little did I know, was another meth addict community that I wasn't prepared for. And so after about 2-3 weeks of staying in California, we wanted to get a bag of weed. Or no, he wanted to sell these. His dad gave him a pound of marijuana, and he wanted to sell that. And I never forget this. So we met these random people. And if you've ever been out to California, you know they have like grape orchards that go back for miles. And so this car, we followed it, and it was leading us back into this orchard of just nothing. It was dark. And so we were following him, and I told James, don't get out of the car. I had a bad feeling, just don't get out of the car and don't bring that pot with you. And that's exactly what he did. He got out of the car. He had the bag with him. He jumped into these people's car, and the next thing you know, they're pulling a gun on him. And at that moment, that was the scariest thing I've ever been through up to date. I thought we were going to be shot for a pound of marijuana. No joke. And so he, like an idiot, tried to get the bag back while these people are pointing a gun at him. And I convinced him just to get in the freaking car so we could go. Because at that point in my life, I didn't want to die. I wasn't ready to die. Not over a bag of pot. And so we got in the car and we just took our losses. We got in touch with a friend that lived up in Washington State. And so we went and stayed with him for a while. And I got my good friend from Madison to come up to Washington State and take a bus from Madison to Washington. Sorry, I'm all fumbled in my words. So she hopped a bus, and she got there about 2 days later. And that, I can say Washington, it was a fun time, but it was also the worst time. That is where I got hooked on heroin. And that is where, for maybe the second time in my life, that I was shooting up heroin. It was a high that I could not even describe. I still can't describe it to this day, but I absolutely fell in love with it. And so we found ourselves, me and my 2 other friends, we were going through, I would say 3 or 4 8 balls of heroin a weekend, not even. And it got to the point where we were ready to fight each other over who got the last shot, because it was that bad. And Jimmy, he was there too with me, but he really wasn't into that kind of stuff. And so he wanted to leave to South Dakota to bring us back home. And I can say I'm very grateful that he basically threw us in the car and made us go home, because if I would have stayed out there, I would not be here today. When I came back from Washington, I was maybe 110 pounds, soaking wet. You could tell my face was all sunk in. Um, and at that point, I really had no communication with my family because I didn't want them to see, especially my mother, I didn't want them to see the addict that I had become. Um, once we came back from Washington, um, I would love to say that the partying stopped, but it didn't. When we got back from Washington, me and Krista split ways with Jimmy, and we did our own thing. We had a welcome home party, and of course there was drugs and drinking and everything in between. Um, and so at this point, my sister, I got the, or my sister had adopted Mason because I knew that if I would have had Mason and if I wouldn't have made the choice to give him to her when he was 4 months old, I don't know where he would have been. I know the state would have taken him. I would have left him somewhere. And I wouldn't have done it on purpose, obviously, but at that point, I was in no position to be a mom. I didn't want to be one. I was selfish. I cared more about chasing my next fix than I did about being a mom. And so 2000, it was still 2009. I was still going hard on drug addiction, but I found myself doing things that I really wouldn't do if I was not high. I went and stayed with my good friend. We'll just call her Mary because I don't want to name names on here. But I went and stayed with her out in the country after me and Billy broke up. And so I stayed with her, and she already had 2 kids and a husband. And I just felt like complete shit about myself because I knew it was just a matter of time before I was going to bring her down with me. And so I found myself stealing from my friends, stealing from my family to try and get high. Not my proudest moments. I would steal from my niece and from Mason. I would steal their Christmas money. I almost got myself landed in prison because I stole my sister's wedding ring and tried to pawn it off. Thankfully, this is where, thankfully she told the cops that it costed less than it did, so I wouldn't get charged with grand theft. But this is the part where I kind of wish I would have fell on my face because my family has always bailed me out. They have always made sure that I wasn't going to go to prison. They put me through treatment. I was 21 when I tried treatment for the first time. And the only reason I went there is because my mom would not. So my mom would just quit talking about it. They were concerned. They were scared for me. My mom would drive around the streets of Sioux Falls every night looking for me. My dad's girlfriend would drive around the streets looking for me. I was a mess. I was a meth addicted mess. So finally, I would say maybe 2010, I just had enough. I found myself, my friend kicked me out because I stole from her, which who wouldn't kick somebody out? I found myself sitting on the bus stop. I think it was a bus stop anyway, but sitting there with Bob. And I had no money. I had no place to go, no food, no family, no friends. I had nothing. I had completely destroyed everything that was good in my life. So, he sat there with me for a while and we tried to figure out what my plan was going to be because He was just as unstable as I was. He's been in and out of prison his whole life. He was a meth addict too, so that didn't help anything either. So 2010, I found my saving grace, I would guess you could say, and I jumped on a bus and I went to Fargo. Now, don't get me wrong, I still smoke pot. I smoked pot from I smoked pot for a long time. Like, that has always been my go-to. And I found myself getting super crazy when I would run out of it. I'd get so mad because I depended on it. I depended on it to make myself feel good. I depended on it to take away my anxieties, to make life livable for the most part. So I hopped a bus and I went to Fargo, and there is where I met my husband. Now, when I met my husband, he was in himself a big time drinker. We partied a lot. He would help me. He would help me find weed from the other guys that he worked with. Finally, we moved to Minnesota, I would say in January, I think it was. And things were going good for a while, as could be expected. We're a new couple. He was still drinking. I was still smoking pot. And then, by then, at this time in my life, like, I've always been a bipolar person. Always been bipolar. I was just misdiagnosed from, they always told me it was ADHD and anxiety. Well, doing drugs for as long as I did obviously did not help. And so when he met me, I was a hot mess. I was coming off of basically a 5-year drug binge. Some of the people, I lost a lot of people close to me because, in honesty, nobody wants to be around that. Nobody wants to see somebody self-sabotage their life like I was doing. But at that moment, and after giving up Mason, I didn't know any other way. I didn't know any other way to make myself come to terms with giving him up for adoption. And so I drowned it out with alcohol and pot and meth and heroin and coke and basically anything you could think of, I did. So 2015, we had our first son, and things were going okay. Let's see, 2015, yep. So I was 5 years clean at that point off of hard drugs, and I didn't go to treatment. I didn't go to meetings. I didn't do any of that. I finally hit the point where I was sick and tired of being sick and tired, and I quit. But don't get me wrong, I still smoke pot. I was very heavily dependent on weed. I just had a brand new newborn. I had no idea what I was doing, no idea how to be a mom and a recovering drug addict at the same time. How to be a mom, a recovering drug addict, and her husband still drinking. Everything was just really scary to me, and so I just stayed high. I wouldn't smoke pot around Kian when he was a baby. I would wait till he went to sleep, and I'd go outside and do it. But it still always kind of made me feel like shit, because I felt like as a how old was I? 25, 26, 27, somewhere around there, 27. I should know how to manage stress and be a mom and not have to be high all the time. But I couldn't, because I didn't know what I know now. I didn't know that I was a bipolar. I didn't know that I could ask for help. I was just starting to repair the relationship with my family that I had spent years and years destroying, basically. So the older Kian got, um, I would still, like, pot was just my go-to, and it always has been. I know I keep saying that, but I would say when I separated from my now husband, we've been together about 10 years now. When I separated from him and I jumped us on a bus from Fort Worth, Texas, back to North Dakota, um, I was completely out of control, not addiction wise, but mentally wise. Um, I I was smoking pot in my sister's house. I was taking my kids places they shouldn't have been taking them. I took them on road trips all the way to South Dakota just to buy a bag of weed and then turn around and come home. Um, I was smoking pot when my kids were running around. Well, Kian Jackson was a little baby, but I was smoking pot when my kids were running around. I would sneak downstairs to smoke pot. Every chance I got, I would smoke pot. And once I moved to North Dakota, my friends started mailing it to me in the mail. And so I always kind of had that um, vessel, I guess, to get pot. And it wasn't until April when me and my sister got into this huge fight because I I was in a manic episode, I guess you want to call it. A manic episode from December up until April. And in April is when literally everything fell apart. And I know I've said this in my other videos too, but that is when um, my sister knew I was high. My sister knew I was smoking pot in there. I would deny it, of course. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't smoke pot because to me, pot has really never been a drug. It's always been a crutch. And so in April, after me and her went toe to toe, I moved in with my mom down to Thief River Falls. I packed up me and my kids and I moved to go stay with my mom, which I knew was just a matter of time before that failed too, because that's just how it went. I would move in with my family. 3 months later, I was moving out. 3 months later, I was moving back. And then 3 months later, I was moving out. And so May is finally when everything crumbled for me. I came up to Minneapolis from Thief River. My kids were down in North Dakota having a birthday party with my niece, and my mom knew I was gone. I was supposed to be at work that day, and I didn't go because buying a bag of weed was way more important because it just helped me deal with my shitty life at the time. And so it was right after Mother's Day. I lost my kids. And my immediate reaction was, well, hell no. I'm going to go down there and I'm going to get my kids because she's not going to do this to me. I'm not losing another kid to my family. And that was the bipolar thinking in me. And so every time my husband wanted to go down there to pick up the kids, I'm like, no, we can't. We can't. We have nowhere to take them. We're living in a damn van right now because we don't have anything. And so it wasn't until June that I got papers from the court from my mom that she was taking third-party custody of my kids. And that's when everything really hit me. That I needed to change or I would never have my kids back. And so I fought it for a while and I fought it and I was angry and I was pissed and sad and I didn't know what to do. And so I went into my psychiatrist's office and I found a psychiatrist and he got me, excuse me, he got me on a med regimen that actually worked for me. And I was no longer in a mania. And it took me almost 8 months of being in a mania to get my shit together, to realize that I needed to be different, that I could not be taking my kids to random hotel rooms to meet up with random people, that I can't load them up in the car and drive down to South Dakota to see a good friend and go get a bag of weed. Like, all that was just not normal thinking, and it wasn't good thinking, and I was not a good mom at that point. But I will say this. When my mom took my kids, and I say it often too, and I was just telling her the other day, this had to happen to me. I had to lose absolutely everything that I held dear to me, because I had to lose everything that I held dear to me to grow up. Because my whole life I've been coddled. My dad has bailed me out of jail. My dad's given me money. My dad's made sure I wasn't homeless. My parents have just always been there to catch me before I fell. And this time, they let me smack down right on my face. And it was a blessing in disguise. Because now I know what rational and irrational thinking is. I know that by going to parenting classes, what I'm supposed to be doing as a parent versus what I'm not supposed to be doing as a parent. I have come so far since May, and I have worked so hard to get my kids back. And I'm happy to say that I have 10 years clean this year. 10 or 11. No, it'll be 11. 11 in January. January 17th to be exact. I have 11 years clean. And I haven't smoked pot since April. And we own our own home. We paid that off this month. I have a good job. I see my kids regularly. Me and my sister are talking to each other again. Me and my mom are talking to each other. Things are just finally going as they should. And I'm so grateful. And I know it sounds crazy. People be like, well, why the hell would you be happy that your mom took your kids? Well, it had to happen. It had to happen for me to grow up. And I'm finally there, and I can finally be the mother that I need to be to my kids. It has been a hell of a journey, and I have struggled my whole life with addiction, with bipolar. And now that I'm 34 years old, I finally understand it. I finally get it. I don't care what people think of me anymore, because opinions, they come and they go. People only know half the story. They can think what they want. All I care about is my family, my husband, my kids, and being the best mom that I can be to them. Everything else is just water under the bridge. So, in a nutshell, that is basically my story. And thank you to those that are watching or have been watching. If anybody wants to chime in, you can. I'm an open book. I'll answer any questions you have. If you may want to make any comments. Otherwise, that's all I got. So, hi Chelsea. Hope you're having a good day. Hi Jill. Alright guys. Well, my tip of advice for the day, just keep keeping on. Because it can't rain all the time. And the sun will shine again. It did for me. It only took about 20 years to do so, but I finally got there. And I'm finally happy and content. So, thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Okay?